A boy rescues a chained dog, but when the owner finds out, she does something terrible to him. In the peaceful suburbs of Portland, Oregon, where towering Douglas firs whispered ancient secrets to the wind, 13-year-old Lucas Bennett walked alone through Laurelhurst Park. The early morning mist clung to his worn sneakers as he followed his usual route, a path he'd taken hundreds of times before. But today would be different. Today would change everything. Lucas had always been different from other kids his age. While they spent their afternoons playing video games and watching YouTube videos, he preferred exploring the hidden corners of his neighborhood, documenting the local wildlife in a weathered notebook his grandmother had given him before moving to Florida. His mother often worried about his solitary nature, but Lucas found comfort in the company of animals. They never judged, never mocked his sensitivity, never questioned why he preferred silence to the chaos of middle school social life. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's keep going. The sound that caught his attention that morning wasn't like anything he'd heard before. It wasn't the cheerful chirping of chickadees or the distant bark of neighborhood dogs. This sound cut through the morning stillness like a knife, a low, mournful whine that made his heart skip a beat. Lucas stopped, his hand instinctively tightening around the strap of his backpack. The sound came again, weaker this time, from somewhere beyond the park's boundary. Lucas knew he shouldn't leave the park. His mother had strict rules about wandering into unknown areas. But something about that sound pulled at him, like an invisible thread tugging at his conscience. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped off the maintained path and pushed through a gap in the fence. The vacant lot behind the park was a wasteland of discarded furniture and overgrown weeds. Old tires created dark shadows where spiders made their homes, and twisted metal gleamed dully in the weak morning light. Lucas picked his way carefully through the debris, following the sound that grew clearer with each step. And then he saw it. Behind a pile of broken pallets, a massive Rottweiler lay chained to a rusty pole. The dog's muscular frame was a map of old scars and fresh wounds, its proud head bowed in defeat. The chain around its neck was thick and crusted with rust, secured with a heavy padlock that had seen better days. Lucas approached slowly, his heart pounding. He'd always been good with animals, but this was different. This wasn't like helping injured birds or feeding stray cats. This was bigger, more dangerous, more important somehow. The Rottweiler lifted its head, dark eyes meeting Lucas's, and in that moment, something profound passed between them. A recognition, a connection, a promise. "Hey, buddy," Lucas whispered, crouching down several feet away. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog's tail thumped once against the ground, a gesture so hopeful it made Lucas's throat tight with emotion. He glanced around the lot, looking for any sign of people, but the place was deserted. The morning silence was broken only by distant traffic and the occasional cry of a crow. Using skills learned from countless nature documentaries, Lucas began the slow process of earning the dog's trust. He pulled his lunch from his backpack, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, and broke off small pieces of bread. Tossing them gently toward the Rottweiler, the dog sniffed each piece carefully before eating, its movements deliberate and cautious. As Lucas watched the dog eat, his mind raced with questions. Who would do this? How long had the dog been here? And most importantly, what was he going to do about it? The responsible thing would be to call animal control. But something told him this situation was more complicated than it appeared. The Rottweiler finished the last piece of bread and looked at Lucas with newfound interest. Slowly, carefully, the dog stretched its neck toward him, straining against the chain. Lucas held his breath as he extended his hand, letting the dog catch his scent. The wet nose touched his fingers, followed by a gentle lick that sealed their friendship. "I'm going to call you Rocky," Lucas declared, his voice stronger now. "And I promise, I'm going to help you. As if understanding the weight of this promise, Rocky's tail wagged with more enthusiasm. Lucas spent the next hour examining the chain and the area around the pole, his mind working through possible solutions. He knew he couldn't leave Rocky here, but he also knew that freeing him wouldn't be easy. The chain was secured with a padlock that looked formidable despite its age. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and Lucas realized with a start that he was late for school. But as he looked at Rocky's trusting eyes, he knew that school would have to wait. He had stumbled upon something far more important than pre-algebra and English literature. This was about life and freedom, about right and wrong, about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Lucas pulled out his phone and texted his mother, telling her he wasn't feeling well and would be home soon. It was the first time he had ever lied to her, and the guilt sat heavy in his stomach. But as he looked at Rocky, at the way the proud dog had been reduced to this pitiful state, he knew it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, he realized, doing the right thing meant breaking some rules. The process of freeing Rocky took longer than Lucas had anticipated. His hands trembled as he worked on the rusted chain with a rock he'd found nearby. The morning chill seeping through his light jacket. Every sound made him jump. A car door slamming in the distance, the rattle of a passing garbage truck, the whisper of wind through the trees. Each noise could signal the arrival of someone who might stop him. Rocky watched him work with patient eyes, occasionally letting out a soft whine that seemed to say, "Hurry!" The trust the dog showed touched something deep in Lucas's soul. Despite whatever trauma Rocky had endured, he still had the capacity to believe in kindness. Lucas worked faster, ignoring the sting of metal against his palms. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the weakest link in the chain gave way with a sharp crack. Rocky stood immediately, shaking off the remaining length of chain like a bad memory. For a moment, Lucas held his breath, uncertain of what a newly freed Rottweiler might do. But Rocky simply pressed his massive head against Lucas's chest, tail wagging with joy. "Come on, boy," Lucas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The journey home was tense. Lucas lived just 15 minutes away, but every step felt like a mile. He kept Rocky close to his side, grateful for the early hour that meant fewer people on the streets. The few early morning joggers they encountered crossed to the other side of the road at the sight of the large Rottweiler, which suited Lucas just fine. His house came into view, a modest two-story with blue shutters and his mother's prized rose garden out front. Lucas's heart pounded as he realized the full implications of what he was doing. His mother, Sarah Bennett, was a kind woman who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. She had always supported his love of animals, but bringing home a full-grown Rottweiler was different from nursing injured birds back to health. Luck was on his side. His mother's car was gone, meaning she had already left for her early shift at the hospital. Lucas led Rocky through the side gate into the backyard, his mind racing with plans. He needed to clean Rocky's wounds, feed him properly, and figure out what to do next. In the garage, Lucas found an old blanket and arranged it in a corner, creating a makeshift bed. Rocky settled onto it gratefully, his dark eyes never leaving Lucas's face. Using the first aid skills he'd learned from his mother, Lucas carefully cleaned Rocky's visible injuries with warm water and the antiseptic wipes he found in the garage first aid kit. "You're safe now," Lucas murmured as he worked, telling Rocky about his life, his dreams, his fears. The dog listened with what seemed like genuine interest, occasionally licking Lucas's hand in encouragement. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." As the morning wore on, Lucas began to notice subtle changes in Rocky's behavior. Despite his injuries, the dog carried himself with a natural dignity. He was intelligent too, quickly understanding basic commands and showing an almost uncanny ability to read Lucas's emotions. This wasn't just any abandoned dog. Rocky had clearly been trained at some point. Lucas's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Hope you're feeling better, sweetie. I'll bring home soup after my shift. Rest up." The guilt of his deception weighed heavily on him. But one look at Rocky's trusting face reinforced his conviction that he'd made the right choice. The sound of a car door slamming next door made both Lucas and Rocky freeze. Through the garage window, Lucas caught a glimpse of their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, retrieving her mail. She was known for her sharp eyes and tendency to report neighborhood irregularities to anyone who would listen. If she saw Rocky, Lucas's heart nearly stopped when he heard Mrs. Chen's voice calling out, "Lucas, are you home? I thought I saw you in the garage." Rocky tensed beside him, but remained perfectly silent, as if understanding the need for stealth. Lucas touched the dog's head reassuringly before responding, "Just organizing some stuff, Mrs. Chen. Mom asked me to clean the garage today." "On a school day?" Mrs. Chen's voice was closer now, her footsteps approaching the garage. "Are you feeling all right?" Lucas's mind raced. He needed to keep Mrs. Chen from discovering Rocky, but he also knew that acting too suspicious would only increase her curiosity. As her shadow fell across the garage window, Lucas made a quick decision. He slipped out of the side door, closing it carefully behind him, and met Mrs. Chen in the driveway. "I'm actually home sick today," he explained, trying to look appropriately miserable. "Just thought I'd do something useful since I'm missing school." Mrs. Chen's expression softened with concern. "You do look a bit pale, dear. Does your mother know you're out here instead of resting?" Before Lucas could respond, a strange car drove slowly past the house. The woman behind the wheel seemed to be studying each house intently, her gaze lingering just a bit too long on Lucas's garage. Something about her made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, a predatory intensity that reminded him of nature documentaries about wolves hunting their prey. The woman's eyes met his for a brief moment, and Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with his fake illness. Somehow, he knew that his adventure with Rocky was about to become much more complicated than he'd imagined. After Mrs. Chen finally returned home, Lucas spent the rest of the morning getting to know Rocky better. The more time he spent with the Rottweiler, the more convinced he became that this was no ordinary abandoned dog. Rocky responded to basic commands with military precision, understood complex gestures, and showed an almost supernatural awareness of Lucas's emotions. While Rocky dozed on his blanket, Lucas used his laptop to research Rottweilers. He learned about their history as working dogs, their intelligence, and their fierce loyalty to their chosen families. But something else caught his attention, a local news website with a classified section. There, prominently displayed, was a notice that made his blood run cold. Missing, purebred Rottweiler, answers to Commander. Substantial reward offered. Contact Karen Blackwood. The post included a phone number and a photo that made Lucas's stomach churn. It showed Rocky, but he looked completely different, younger, healthier, standing at attention next to a trophy. The caption mentioned several champion show dog titles, but what really caught Lucas's attention was the date of the post. It was from 6 months ago. 6 months, Lucas whispered to Rocky, who lifted his head at the sound of his voice. She left you chained up there for 6 months and now she wants you back." The sound of the garage door opening made both Lucas and Rocky jump. His mother wasn't due home for hours. Heart pounding, Lucas peered through the window and saw a familiar car in the driveway, the same one that had driven past earlier. A woman was getting out, her movements sharp and purposeful. Lucas recognized her from the website's photo, Karen Blackwood. She wore expensive-looking clothes and carried herself with an air of authority that made Lucas instinctively want to shrink away. But when she reached the front door and rang the doorbell, he stood his ground, placing himself protectively in front of Rocky. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Rocky remained perfectly still, but Lucas could feel the tension radiating from him. After what seemed like an eternity, Karen returned to her car. But instead of leaving, she pulled out her phone and appeared to make several calls. Lucas used this moment to really look at her. Despite her polished appearance, there was something unsettling about Karen Blackwood. Her movements were too controlled, her smile too practiced when she spoke into the phone. She reminded Lucas of a documentary he'd once watched about predators that disguise themselves to lure in their prey. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Honey, Mrs. Chen called. She's worried about you. Is everything okay?" Before Lucas could respond, another text arrived. "Also, a woman named Karen Blackwood called the hospital looking for me. Says she's from the American Kennel Club and needs to discuss something important. Do you know anything about this?" Lucas's hands shook as he typed out a reply. "Mom, I need to tell you something important, but not over text. Can you come home early today?" The response was immediate. "What's wrong? Should I be worried?" Lucas looked at Rocky, who met his gaze with unwavering trust. "Nothing's wrong," he typed back. "I just need your help with something important." While waiting for his mother's response, Lucas noticed movement outside. Karen was walking around the perimeter of their property, her eyes scanning every detail. When she reached the side gate to the backyard, she paused, her hand hovering over the latch. Lucas held his breath, but Karen moved on after a moment. She returned to her car but didn't leave. Instead, she settled in, clearly preparing for a long wait. Using his phone, Lucas began researching Karen Blackwood. What he found shocked him. She was indeed connected to the American Kennel Club, but there were also numerous complaints and allegations about her treatment of dogs. Most had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the pattern was clear to Lucas. A social media post from a former employee of Karen's caught his attention. The post had been deleted, but Lucas found it cached. "The perfect show dogs don't come from love and care. They come from fear and control. I've seen things at Blackwood Kennels that keep me awake at night." Rocky whined softly, pressing against Lucas's leg. The dog's eyes were fixed on the window, tracking Karen's car, even though they couldn't see it from their position. Lucas noticed something else about Rocky's behavior. He trembled slightly at the mere sound of Karen's voice when she spoke on the phone. The pieces were starting to come together, but Lucas knew he needed more information. He couldn't keep Rocky hidden in the garage forever, and Karen Blackwood clearly wasn't going to give up easily. He needed allies, resources, and most importantly, he needed a plan. A notification popped up on his phone, a response from his mother. "I'll be home in an hour. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. Stay inside until I get there." Lucas hugged Rocky, burying his face in the dog's thick fur. "We'll figure this out," he whispered, echoing his mother's words. "I promise." But as he watched Karen's car through the garage window, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. The question was, what would it cost to win it? The hour waiting for his mother felt like an eternity. Lucas spent the time alternating between watching Karen's car through the window and comforting Rocky, who remained alert but calm. He used these moments to document Rocky's injuries with his phone's camera, making sure to capture clear images of the healing wounds and scars that marked the dog's powerful frame. When Sarah Bennett's car finally pulled into the driveway, Lucas saw Karen immediately straighten up in her vehicle. His mother, still wearing her hospital scrubs, stepped out and was immediately approached by Karen, who moved with the smooth confidence of someone used to getting her way. Through the garage window, Lucas could hear fragments of their conversation. Karen's voice was honey-sweet, but there was an edge to it that made him shiver. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm Karen Blackwood. I believe your son may have found my champion show dog. He's a very valuable animal." Lucas watched his mother's body language change, the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the way she shifted her weight to create a subtle barrier between Karen and their house. Sarah Bennett might be a gentle soul, but she was also an emergency room nurse who dealt with difficult situations daily. Ms. Blackwood, his mother's voice was professionally neutral. "I've just finished a 12-hour shift. Why don't you give me your contact information, and we can discuss this after I've had a chance to speak with my son." Karen's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "Mrs. Bennett, I don't think you understand the value of this animal. There could be legal consequences. Is that a threat, Ms. Blackwood?" The steel in his mother's voice made Lucas proud. "Because I should inform you that I record all conversations on my property for security purposes." This wasn't true, but Lucas watched with satisfaction as Karen took a step back. "Of course not." Karen's smile returned, brittle as thin ice. "I'll leave my card. Please call me once you've spoken with Lucas." She walked back to her car, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Lucas waited until Karen's car had disappeared around the corner before emerging from the garage. His mother stood in the driveway, staring at Karen's business card with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," Lucas began, but she held up a hand. "Inside," she said quietly. "And I assume we need to bring your new friend too?" Lucas blinked in surprise. "How did you... Mrs. Chen mentioned seeing you sneak something into the garage this morning. And I'm your mother, Lucas. I know when you're hiding something important." She smiled softly. "Though I admit, I was expecting maybe a stray cat, not whatever has Karen Blackwood so worked up." Together, they helped Rocky into the house through the back door. Sarah gasped when she saw him, her trained medical eye immediately cataloguing his injuries. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. And Lucas wasn't sure if she was talking to him or Rocky. Over the next hour, Lucas told his mother everything, finding Rocky in the vacant lot, the chain, the classified aid, and his research into Karen Blackwood. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with each detail. "We should call the police," she said finally. "But Mom, what if they give him back to her? She'll say he's her property. And she has all the registration papers." "Lucas," his mother's voice was gentle but firm, "we need to do this the right way. But that doesn't mean we're going to abandon Rocky." She scratched behind the Rottweiler's ears, earning a grateful tail wag. "We just need to be smart about this." Sarah pulled out her phone and made a call. "Dr. Martinez, it's Sarah Bennett. Remember when you said you owed me a favor after I helped with your daughter's emergency? I need to cash that in." Lucas listened as his mother arranged for the local veterinarian to make a house call. "We need documentation of his condition," she explained after hanging up. "If we're going to help Rocky, we need evidence." A soft knock at the front door made them all freeze. Rocky's ears perked up, but he remained calm, pressing closer to Lucas. Sarah checked through the peephole and relaxed. "It's Mrs. Chen," she said, opening the door. Their elderly neighbor bustled in, carrying a large pot. "I brought soup," she announced, then stopped short at the sight of Rocky. Instead of the fear or alarm Lucas expected, her face hardened with recognition. "I knew I recognized that woman's car," Mrs. Chen said, placing the pot on the counter with trembling hands. "She used to come to the old Peterson place, late at night. We would hear..." She trailed off, looking at Rocky with sad eyes. "Let's just say some of us in the neighborhood had our suspicions, but we could never prove anything." "Mrs. Chen," Sarah said carefully, "would you be willing to make a statement about what you saw and heard?" The older woman straightened her spine. "Child, I've been waiting years for someone to finally ask me that question. But you need to understand, Karen Blackwood has powerful friends. This won't be easy." Lucas looked at Rocky, then at his mother, and finally at Mrs. Chen. He realized that in just one day, his simple act of kindness had grown into something much larger. The weight of it should have been frightening, but instead, he felt stronger. He wasn't alone anymore. He had allies. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy," he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try." Dr. Martinez arrived just as the sun was setting, her weathered veterinary bag in one hand and a determined expression on her face. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, but there was nothing soft about the way she documented Rocky's condition. Each photograph was taken with clinical precision, each note written in careful detail. "This isn't just neglect," she said finally, straightening up from her examination. "This dog has been systematically abused. See these marks here." She pointed to a pattern of scars on Rocky's flank. "These are consistent with training techniques that were banned by every reputable kennel club years ago." Sarah and Lucas exchanged glances while Mrs. Chen nodded grimly. "I've treated other dogs from Blackwood Kennels before," Dr. Martinez continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. "But they always came with handlers, never Karen herself. And the paperwork was always complicated." "What do you mean, complicated?" Sarah asked, taking notes on her phone. "Different names on different forms, payment in cash only. And the handlers were always very insistent that certain things shouldn't be included in the medical records." Dr. Martinez's hands trembled slightly as she packed away her equipment. "I reported it, of course, but somehow the complaints never went anywhere." A sharp knock at the front door made everyone jump. Rocky, who had been perfectly calm during his examination, suddenly went rigid. Through the window, they could see two figures in dark suits standing on the porch. "Animal control," a male voice called out. "We have a report of a dangerous dog at this address." Lucas's heart began to race, but his mother stepped forward with the calm authority that came from years of handling emergency room crises. "Just a moment," she called out, then turned to the others. "Mrs. Chen, would you please take Lucas and Rocky upstairs? Dr. Martinez and I will handle this." "Mom, I should—" Lucas began to protest, but the look in his mother's eyes stopped him. "Trust me," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Go." From upstairs, Lucas, Rocky, and Mrs. Chen could hear the conversation below. The animal control officers were professional but insistent. They had received multiple complaints about a dangerous Rottweiler. They needed to investigate. "Gentlemen," Dr. Martinez's voice carried clearly, "I'm just finishing up a house call here. I can assure you there's no dangerous dog on the premises. Would you like to see my medical records?" "Ma'am, we have a sworn statement from Karen Blackwood, a respected member of the American Kennel Club, stating that her valuable show dog has been stolen and is being kept here." Sarah's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Do you have a warrant?" A pause. "No. But then I'm sure you understand that you can't enter my home without one. I'm happy to schedule an inspection at a more appropriate time, with my lawyer present." "Mrs. Bennett, we're trying to handle this professionally, but Ms. Blackwood is prepared to press charges." "For what?" Dr. Martinez interrupted. "I've been treating family pets in this house all afternoon. Would you like to see my appointment book? Or should I call the State Veterinary Board and ask them about the proper protocols for handling unsubstantiated claims?" The conversation continued, but Lucas was distracted by Mrs. Chen, who was typing rapidly on her phone. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Calling in reinforcements," she replied with a slight smile. "You're not the only one who's been waiting for a chance to expose Karen Blackwood." A few minutes later, they heard cars pulling up outside. Lucas peeked through the bedroom window and saw several news vans parking along the street. Reporters were already setting up cameras, and more cars were arriving, these containing people with animal rights advocate badges and T-shirts. "How did they know?" Lucas asked in amazement. Mrs. Chen's eyes twinkled. Let's just say I've been part of an online community tracking Karen's activities for years. We've been gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. When I saw Rocky this afternoon, I knew that moment had finally come. Downstairs, they could hear the animal control officers retreating in the face of media attention. Through the window, Lucas watched them hurry to their van, avoiding the reporters who were shouting questions about Karen Blackwood and allegations of animal abuse. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with victory. They're gone for now, but this isn't over. Karen won't give up easily. Good, Mrs. Chen said firmly, because neither will we. Lucas, dear, would you like to see what we've been collecting? She handed him her tablet, open to a private forum. Lucas's eyes widened as he scrolled through post after post, photographs, veterinary records, testimony from former employees, all of it pointing to a pattern of behavior that made his blood run cold. There are dozens of us, Mrs. Chen explained. The former show dog owners, veterinarians, kennel workers. We've all seen pieces of the puzzle, but no one had enough evidence on their own, until now. Lucas looked at Rocky, who was sitting calmly beside him, then back at the tablet. What do we do next? Dr. Martinez joined them upstairs, her expression determined. We build a case, a real one this time, with evidence that can't be buried or dismissed. But we need to move carefully. Karen has friends in high places, and we need to keep Rocky safe, Lucas added, his hand resting protectively on the dog's head. Sarah nodded. Which means we need a plan, a good one. Because if I know anything about people like Karen Blackwood, she's already planning her next move. As if on cue, Lucas's phone buzzed with a news alert. Karen Blackwood was holding a press conference outside her kennels, tears in her eyes as she pleaded for the return of her beloved champion show dog. The battle lines were being drawn, and Lucas realized that saving Rocky had become about much more than just one dog. It had become about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, the Bennett house had transformed into an impromptu command center. The dining room table was covered with laptops, documents, and half-empty coffee cups. Mrs. Chen had brought in her entire network of activists via video chat, while Dr. Martinez coordinated with other veterinarians who had treated dogs from Blackwood kennels. Sarah had taken an emergency day off from the hospital, something she hadn't done in years. She sat at the head of the table, organizing the flood of information into a coherent narrative. Lucas watched in amazement as more and more people joined their cause, each bringing their own piece of the puzzle. "Look at this," called out Emily, one of Mrs. Chen's online contacts, her face serious on the laptop screen. "I found financial records from the last 5 major dog shows where Karen competed. The entry fees alone are astronomical. But look at these special handling fees paid to the judges." Sarah leaned forward, her nurse's training evident in her methodical approach. "Can we prove these payments were bribes?" "Not directly," Emily admitted. "But I've cross-referenced the dates with show results. Every time these fees appear, Karen's dogs won, even when other handlers reported they were showing signs of stress or injury." Rocky lay at Lucas's feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch the activity around him. The doorbell rang, making everyone freeze, but it was just another supporter, a former handler from Blackwood Kennels named James, his face lined with worry and determination. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said as he sat down, pulling out a thick folder. "But Karen, she has a way of making problems disappear. People who crossed her would suddenly find themselves unable to work in any reputable kennel. Their reputations would be destroyed overnight." Lucas listened as James detailed the systematic abuse at Blackwood Kennels, the harsh training methods, the cover-ups, the network of corrupt officials who looked the other way. But it was what he said about Rocky that made Lucas's blood boil. Commander, that's what she called him, was supposed to be her masterpiece, a perfect show dog. When he started showing signs of independence, refusing to perform the more painful routines, James's voice cracked. I've never seen her so angry. That's when I quit. I couldn't watch anymore. A notification popped up on several screens simultaneously. Karen was giving another interview on local television. They watched in tense silence as she painted herself as the victim, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. My beautiful commander was more than just a show dog, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. He was family. To think that someone would steal him, possibly putting him in danger. I'm offering a $20,000 reward for his safe return, no questions asked. She's trying to buy him back, Lucas realized. She knows people might recognize him. Not just that, Mrs. Chen pointed out. Look at the comments section under the interview stream. The online response was divided. While many expressed sympathy for Karen, others were beginning to ask questions. Photos of Rocky's injuries were being shared. Alongside testimonials from former employees, the hashtag #EschewJusticeForCommander was trending. Sarah's phone rang. It was her lawyer friend, Marcus. She put him on speaker. The good news is, we have enough evidence to file for an emergency injunction, preventing Karen from claiming Rocky until a full investigation can be conducted. The bad news, she's filed her own lawsuit against you, Sarah, and against Lucas. She's suing a child. Mrs. Chen's voice rose in indignation. It's a tactic, Marcus explained. She's claiming emotional distress, theft of property, and defamation. The amounts are astronomical. She knows you can't fight a lengthy legal battle. But instead of looking worried, Sarah smiled. Actually, that might be exactly what we need. Marcus, what happens during the discovery phase of a lawsuit? There was a pause, then a low chuckle from the phone. All relevant documents would have to be submitted to the court, including Karen's private records, correspondence, financial statements. Everything we need to prove what's really been happening at Blackwood Kennels, James finished, his eyes lighting up with understanding. Lucas felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by concern when he saw another news alert. Karen had scheduled a press conference at her kennels for the following day. She was inviting the media to tour her facilities, to prove she had nothing to hide. It'll be staged, James warned. She'll show them exactly what she wants them to see. The real evidence, the training rooms in the basement, that'll all be locked away. Unless, Lucas began, an idea forming in his mind. Unless someone could show them where to look. The adults turned to him, and Lucas took a deep breath. Karen doesn't know that we have James. She doesn't know how much we know. What if we could use her own press conference against her? Sarah started to object, but Mrs. Chen held up a hand. Let him finish. Sometimes the best ideas come from those who see things most clearly. Lucas scratched Rocky's ears as he outlined his plan. It was risky, but as he spoke, he saw the expressions around the table change from doubt to consideration, to cautious optimism. It could work, James said finally. But the timing would have to be perfect, and we'd need help, lots of it. Help is something we have in abundance, Mrs. Chen smiled, gesturing to the screens full of supporters around the world. The question is, are we ready to take this fight public? Lucas looked at Rocky, who met his gaze with complete trust. We don't have a choice, he said. Karen's not going to stop until she's exposed, really exposed, where she can't hide or buy her way out of it. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Then we better make sure we get it right, because we're only going to get one chance at this. The day of Karen's press conference dawned bright and clear, but the atmosphere in the Bennett household was electric with tension. Lucas had barely slept, going over the plan again and again in his mind. Rocky seemed to sense his anxiety, staying closer than usual, offering silent support with his steady presence. Remember, Sarah said as she adjusted Lucas's tie. He was wearing his only dress shirt, trying to look as professional as possible. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." But Lucas shook his head. "I'm the one who found Rocky. I need to be there." The plan they had developed was intricate but elegant in its simplicity. While Karen was busy showing the media her pristine kennels upstairs, James would guide a select group of reporters and animal welfare officials to the areas she didn't want them to see. But they needed a distraction, something to keep Karen occupied and off balance. That's where Lucas came in. Mrs. Chen had arrived early, bringing with her a group of local animal rights activists. They gathered in the living room for a final briefing, their faces serious but determined. Through video chat, Emily coordinated with other supporters around the country, ensuring their social media campaign would launch at exactly the right moment. "We've confirmed that 37 news outlets will be attending," Emily reported, including 3 major networks. Karen's press conference has attracted more attention than she anticipated, especially after those photos of Rocky went viral yesterday. Dr. Martinez arrived next, carrying a thick folder of medical records. "I've contacted every vet in the state who's treated Karen's dogs. 7 of them are willing to go on record about the injuries they've documented. 3 more have agreed to testify if this goes to court." Lucas felt overwhelmed by the scale of what they were attempting, but when he looked at Rocky, his resolve strengthened. The Rottweiler had survived months of abuse, never losing his capacity for trust and love. The least Lucas could do was be brave for one day. "The press conference starts at noon," James reminded everyone, checking his watch. "Karen will begin with a tour of the main kennel area, all clean, modern, and completely for show. That's when I'll approach the investigators from the Animal Welfare League. They're already suspicious of her operation. They just need proof." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, their lawyer. "The injunction is in place," she announced. "Karen can't legally remove any documents or equipment from the premises during the investigation, which means everything we need to prove what she's been doing should still be there," James added grimly. "The training equipment, the medical records, the financial documents." A news alert popped up on several phones simultaneously. Karen was doing a pre-press conference interview outside her kennels. They watched as she played her role perfectly, tears glistening in her eyes as she talked about her beloved commander and her dedication to ethical breeding practices. "She's good," Mrs. Chen admitted reluctantly. "If I didn't know better, I'd believe every word." "That's why this has to work," Lucas said, his voice stronger than he felt, "because she's fooled people for too long." The next hour was a blur of final preparations. Lucas reviewed his role one last time while Sarah helped him memorize the key points he needed to make. They had decided that authenticity was their best weapon. He would tell the simple truth about finding Rocky, letting Karen's own actions condemn her. As they prepared to leave, Rocky became agitated for the first time since his rescue. He whined softly, pressing against Lucas's legs. "He can't come with us," Sarah reminded Lucas gently. "It's too risky." "I know." Lucas knelt beside Rocky, looking into his eyes. "But we're doing this for you, boy, and for all the other dogs she's hurt." Dr. Martinez agreed to stay behind with Rocky, monitoring the situation via live stream and ready to provide medical documentation if needed. "Just remember," she told Lucas, "you're not alone in this. We're all with you." The drive to Blackwood Kennels seemed to take both forever and no time at all. As they approached, they could see the media circus had already begun. News vans lined the street, reporters did live stand-ups, and a crowd of spectators and protesters had gathered behind barriers. Karen stood at the entrance to her facility, immaculately dressed and surrounded by supporters. She was in her element, playing to the cameras with practiced charm. But when she saw Lucas step out of his mother's car, her smile flickered for just a moment. "Remember," Sarah whispered, squeezing Lucas's hand, "all you have to do is tell the truth. The truth is stronger than any lie she can tell." Lucas took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. In his pocket, he carried a small dog treat that Rocky had touched, a reminder of why he was doing this. As cameras turned toward him and reporters began shouting questions, he thought of all the animals who couldn't speak for themselves. The moment of truth had arrived. And Lucas was ready. The media frenzy intensified as Lucas approached the entrance to Blackwood Kennels. Reporters called out questions, cameras flashed, and the crowd of spectators grew larger by the minute. Karen's practiced smile remained fixed, but her eyes had turned cold and calculating. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the professional sound system she'd set up, "I'm touched by the attention this situation has received. As you can see, even the young man who has my beloved commander has decided to join us today." She took a step toward Lucas, arms outstretched as if to embrace him, but Sarah smoothly intercepted, positioning herself between them. The cameras caught every moment of the subtle dance, and Lucas could hear the murmur of interest from the assembled reporters. "Mrs. Blackwood," one journalist called out, "can you respond to the photos circulating online? The ones showing injuries to what appears to be your dog." Karen's smile never wavered. "Clearly doctored images, created by those who wish to harm my reputation. I invite you all inside to see how we really treat our champions at Blackwood Kennels. Our facilities are state-of-the-art, our methods humane and progressive." As she spoke, James was quietly moving through the crowd, making contact with key investigators and reporters, preparing them for what was to come. Mrs. Chen and her network of activists had positioned themselves strategically around the property, their phones recording everything. "Before we begin the tour," Karen continued, "I'd like to address the young man who has caused so much confusion. Lucas, dear, I understand you thought you were helping, but Commander belongs here, with people who understand his special needs as a champion show dog." Lucas felt all eyes turn to him. His heart was pounding. But he remembered Rocky's trust, remembered the scars that marked the dog's body, remembered the way he trembled at the mere sound of Karen's voice. "His name is Rocky now," Lucas said, his clear young voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd, "and he was chained in an abandoned lot, covered in wounds, starving and afraid." Karen's smile flickered. Children have such vivid imaginations. "Commander Rocky, as you call him, is a valuable show dog who was stolen from my care. I have all the documentation, like these documents." James stepped forward, holding up his folder. "I have records of every injury, every violation, every complaint that was quietly buried. I was your head trainer for 3 years. Mrs. Blackwood, I saw everything." The crowd erupted in questions. Karen's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "James Harrison was fired for incompetence. His accusations are supported by medical records." Dr. Martinez's voice came through the speakers. She had patched in via video call, her face displayed on several reporters' tablets. "I have documentation of systematic abuse spanning years, co-signed by dozens of veterinarians across 3 states. Karen's supporters began to look uncertain. The Animal Welfare League investigators were taking notes, their expressions growing more serious by the minute, but Karen wasn't finished. "This is absurd," she declared. "I've devoted my life to these dogs. Come inside, see for yourself. Our facilities are open for complete inspection." "All of them?" Lucas asked, his voice stronger now. "Even the basement training rooms?" Karen's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. We don't—" "The rooms with the shock collars," James interrupted. "But the ones where you keep the difficult dogs. Should we show them those facilities, Ms. Blackwood? The crowd had grown silent, hanging on every word. Even the most skeptical reporters were leaning forward, sensing the story taking a dramatic turn. "These are outrageous accusations," Karen snapped, her friendly facade crumbling. "I don't have to stand here and—" She was interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze. From inside the main building came a chorus of barking, dozens of dogs, all crying out at once. The sound was haunting, filled with fear and desperation. "Those don't sound like happy, well-cared-for animals," Sarah observed quietly. But in the silence, everyone heard her. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her tablet displaying a live stream that was already going viral. "We have over 10,000 people watching right now. Ms. Blackwood, former clients, other trainers, animal welfare advocates from around the world. They're all sharing their stories. The truth is coming out." Karen's face contorted with rage. "You have no right. This is private property. I'll sue every one of you for defamation." "Actually," Marcus's voice came through the speakers. He had been listening in, ready with legal support. "Thanks to the emergency injunction granted this morning, these premises are now under investigation. No one is going anywhere until every inch of this facility has been properly examined." Lucas watched as Karen's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her. But there was no satisfaction in it. Only a deep sadness for all the animals who had suffered and a fierce determination to ensure it never happened again. The Animal Welfare League investigators were already moving toward the building, followed by television cameras. James led them straight to the basement entrance, ignoring Karen's increasingly desperate protests. "Lucas," Sarah said softly, "I think it's time to show them the truth about Rocky." The investigation of Blackwood Kennels took hours, each new discovery adding to the mounting evidence against Karen. Television crews broadcasted live as investigators uncovered the true nature of her operation. The pristine kennels upstairs were just for show. The real horrors lay beneath. Lucas watched from a distance as James guided the investigators through the facility. Even from outside, they could hear the gasps and exclamations as each new room was examined. Karen stood rigid by the entrance, her lawyers hovering nervously as more and more evidence came to light. "The live stream has over 1 million viewers now," Mrs. Chen reported, her tablet displaying a constant stream of comments and shares. "People are coming forward from all over the country. Other show dog owners, former employees, even judges who were pressured to look the other way." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Martinez. "Rocky's story is trending nationwide. Major animal rights organizations are picking it up. They're calling him the dog who exposed the dark side of show breeding." The Animal Welfare League's lead investigator, a stern-faced woman named Diana Reynolds, emerged from the building. Her expression was grim as she approached the assembled media. "What we've found inside is disturbing," she announced, her voice steady but laden with controlled anger. "Evidence of systematic animal abuse, falsified medical records, and training methods that violate every standard of humane treatment. We're impounding all animals on the premises pending a full investigation." Karen lunged forward, her composure finally shattering completely. "You can't do this. Those dogs are my property. I have contracts, registrations." "Ms. Blackwood," Diana cut her off coldly, "you should be more concerned about the criminal charges you're likely to face." As if on cue, more official vehicles began arriving. Police cars, animal transport vans, additional investigators. The scale of the operation was growing by the minute. Local residents gathered at the edges of the property, many in tears as they watched dogs being carefully removed from the facility. James approached Lucas and Sarah, his face showing exhaustion but relief. "The evidence is overwhelming," he said quietly. "The basement, it was worse than I remembered. She never cleaned up, never got rid of anything. It's all there, years of abuse, documented in her own records." Lucas felt a mix of emotions: relief that the truth was finally out, sadness for all the animals who had suffered, and a burning need to get back to Rocky. As if reading his mind, Sarah wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Let's go home," she said softly. "Rocky needs to know it's over." But before they could leave, a commotion near the kennels drew their attention. One of the rescue workers had found something, a hidden room behind a false wall in the basement. The contents made even the most hardened investigators pause. Trophies, ribbons, and photographs, all documenting Karen's rise in the show dog world. But mixed among them were the darker items, tools of abuse, records of her methods, and most damning of all, a journal detailing her techniques for breaking a dog's spirit. "She kept records of everything," James said, his voice hollow. "She was proud of it. She saw it as her legacy." Karen's lawyers were now urgently conferring with her, but she seemed beyond reaching. Her carefully constructed world had crumbled, and with it, her mask of respectability had fallen away completely. "Lucas," a reporter called out, "how did you know? What made you decide to help Rocky that day?" Lucas thought carefully before answering, aware that his words would be broadcast nationwide. "I just listened to my heart," he said simply. "When you see someone suffering, human or animal, and you have the power to help, you have to try. Rocky taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right anyway." The sentiment resonated with the crowd. On social media, Shaq's Be Like Rocky was trending alongside Justice for Show Dogs. The story had struck a chord, touching something deep in people's hearts. Mrs. Chen's tablet was flooded with messages from her network. "It's not just about Rocky anymore," she said, showing them the screen. "People are coming forward about other kennels. Other breeders, this is becoming a movement." Sarah checked her phone again. "Dr. Martinez says Rocky's been watching the live stream with her. She says he's been calm, almost like he knows what's happening." Lucas smiled, thinking of his brave friend waiting at home. "He knows," he said confidently. "He always understood more than we realized." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the kennel grounds, the full impact of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. This wasn't just about saving one dog. They had exposed a system of abuse that had operated in the shadows for years. Change was coming, and it had started with a boy who refused to walk away from a dog in need. But their work wasn't finished. As they watched the rescue operations continue, Lucas knew this was just the beginning of a longer journey. Rocky was safe, but there were other animals who needed help, other wrongs that needed to be righted. The question was, what would they do next? The days following the exposure of Blackwood Kennels passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Bennett house had become a hub for what the media was calling the Rocky Revolution, a nationwide movement to reform show dog breeding practices and strengthen animal protection laws. Lucas sat on the living room floor with Rocky, watching as their story played out on national news. The Rottweiler had become a symbol of hope and change, his gentle demeanor and evident recovery touching hearts across the country. But what amazed Lucas most was how Rocky seemed to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "He's not just a survivor anymore," Dr. Martinez observed during one of her regular checkups. "He's a teacher. Every time we bring in another rescued dog, Rocky knows exactly how to approach them, how to help them feel safe." The rescue operations at Blackwood Kennels had revealed dozens of dogs in need of rehabilitation. Many had been placed with experienced foster families, but some of the most traumatized ones were brought to the Bennett house first. Rocky, it seemed, had a gift for helping them heal. "It's like he remembers what it felt like," Lucas said, watching as Rocky gently encouraged a terrified Doberman to take treats from his hand. "And he knows exactly what they need." Sarah had taken a temporary leave from the hospital to help coordinate the growing network of supporters. The dining room table was still covered with laptops and documents, but now they were focused on creating change rather than exposing crimes. "The state legislature is fast-tracking new regulations for show dog breeding," she announced one morning, reading from her tablet. "They're calling it the Rocky Act. It would require independent oversight of all breeding facilities and establish strict guidelines for training methods." Mrs. Chen's animal rights network had expanded exponentially. What started as a small group of concerned citizens had grown into a powerful advocacy organization. They were now investigating reports of abuse at other kennels, working closely with law enforcement and animal welfare agencies. "People aren't afraid to speak up anymore," James explained during one of their daily strategy meetings. Rocky's story showed them that change is possible if we work together. The media attention hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified as more details emerged about the scope of Karen's operation and its connections to the larger show dog industry. But Lucas and his family had been careful to keep the focus on the positive changes being made, rather than dwelling on the darkness they'd exposed. "It's not about revenge," Lucas told a reporter who asked how he felt about Karen's pending criminal charges. "It's about making sure this never happens to another animal." One sunny afternoon, as Lucas and Rocky walked through Laurelhurst Park, their first walk there since that fateful morning, they were approached by a young girl clutching a tablet. "Are you Lucas?" she asked shyly. "The one who saved Rocky." Lucas nodded, watching as Rocky gently wagged his tail at the girl. "I saw your story online," she continued. "It made me want to help too. My friends and I started a club at school. We're raising money for the animal shelter and learning about how to spot signs of abuse." It wasn't the first time they'd heard such stories. All across the country, people were being inspired to take action. Children were starting animal welfare clubs. Adults were volunteering at shelters, and communities were coming together to protect their most vulnerable members. Back home, Lucas found Sarah and Mrs. Chen reviewing proposals for a new project, a rehabilitation center for rescued show dogs. The plans showed a facility designed around the lessons they'd learned from Rocky. Plenty of open spaces, gentle training methods, and most importantly, an emphasis on healing both physical and emotional wounds. "We've already received pledges for most of the funding," Mrs. Chen said excitedly. "People want to be part of this change." That evening, as the sun set over Portland, Lucas sat on the back porch with Rocky. The Rottweiler's coat had regained its shine, and his eyes were bright with contentment. But it was more than just physical healing. Rocky had found his purpose, just as Lucas had found his. "We did it, boy," Lucas whispered, scratching behind Rocky's ears. "We really did it." Rocky's tail thumped against the porch boards in agreement. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the city preparing for night. But here in their sanctuary, there was only peace. The journey wasn't over in many ways. It was just beginning, but they would face whatever came next together. A notification popped up on Lucas's phone. Another kennel had been investigated. More dogs rescued, more people joining the movement. The ripples of change were spreading, touching lives far beyond what they could have imagined that first morning in the vacant lot. And at the center of it all was the unshakable bond between a boy and his dog, a bond that had proven strong enough to change the world, one heart at a time. 1 year had passed since that fateful morning when Lucas found Rocky. The transformation in both their lives, and in the lives of countless others, was remarkable. The Bennett house, once a quiet suburban home, had become the headquarters of the Rocky Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to animal welfare and education. On this particular morning, Lucas stood before a crowd gathered in Laurelhurst Park, Rocky sitting proudly beside him. The occasion was the grand opening of the Rocky Rehabilitation Center, a state-of-the-art facility designed to help abused show dogs recover and find loving homes. The center represented everything they had fought for, a place of healing, hope, and second chances. "A year ago," Lucas began, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd, "I was just a kid who loved animals. I never imagined that helping one dog would lead to all of this. But Rocky taught me something important, that one act of kindness can start a chain reaction that changes the world." The center itself was a testament to that change. Built with donations from supporters around the world, it featured spacious recovery areas, gentle training facilities, and a veterinary clinic staffed by professionals dedicated to healing both physical and emotional wounds. Dr. Martinez had left her private practice to serve as the center's chief veterinarian. Sarah watched from the sidelines, tears in her eyes as she remembered how far they'd come. The Rocky Act had been passed in 12 states now, with more following suit. Show dog breeding regulations had been completely overhauled, with independent oversight committees ensuring humane practices. The dark side of the industry had been brought into the light, and real change was taking root. Mrs. Chen, now the Foundation's outreach director, stepped forward to share some news. "Thanks to our network of supporters, we've helped rescue over 500 dogs this year alone. But more importantly, we've changed how people think about animal welfare. It's not just about saving animals. It's about creating a world where they don't need saving in the first place." James, who had become the center's head trainer, brought forward a special surprise. The first group of rehabilitation graduates, 6 dogs, each with their own story of survival, walked proudly with their new families. Among them was the terrified Doberman that Rocky had first helped comfort, now transformed into a confident, happy dog. "Eddie, these success stories," James explained, "are possible because of what Rocky showed us, that with patience, understanding, and love, even the deepest wounds can heal." The ceremony continued with the unveiling of a special tribute, a bronze statue of Rocky placed at the entrance to the center. The plaque beneath it read, "For every animal who needed someone to listen, and for every person brave enough to take a stand, change begins with compassion." Rocky examined his metallic counterpart with typical gentle curiosity, causing laughter to ripple through the crowd. He had become something of a local celebrity, but fame hadn't changed him. He remained the same loving, patient soul who had taught them all so much about resilience and forgiveness. After the ceremony, as people toured the new facility, Lucas found a quiet moment with Rocky in the center's peaceful garden. The Rottweiler laid his head on Lucas's lap, his eyes full of contentment. "You know what, boy?" Lucas said softly, scratching behind Rocky's ears. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. All we have to do is listen to our hearts and be brave enough to act." The Foundation's work was far from over. There were still battles to fight, animals to save, and minds to change. But they had created something powerful, a community of people dedicated to making a difference, inspired by the simple story of a boy and his dog. As the sun set over Portland, casting a golden glow over the new center, Lucas thought about all the lives that would be touched by this place. Every rescued animal would carry forward Rocky's legacy of resilience and love. Every person who heard their story would be reminded that they too had the power to create change. Rocky stood up, gently tugging Lucas toward the center's entrance where Sarah, Mrs. Chen, James, and Dr. Martinez were waiting. Together, they had formed a family bound not by blood, but by a shared commitment to making the world a better place. "Come on, boy," Lucas said, rising to join them. "We've got work to do." And as they walked together into the warm evening light, Lucas knew that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was just another beginning, another chapter in a story that would continue to inspire generations to come. A story that proved that the greatest changes often start with the simplest acts of kindness, and that love, in all its forms, has the power to transform the world. Dear listeners, we hope Rocky and Lucas's journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. This story reminds us that every one of us has the power to make a difference in the world. If you've been moved by their tale of courage, compassion, and transformation, we invite you to join our community of storytellers and dreamers. Subscribe to our channel to discover more inspiring stories that celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. Leave a like if you believe in the power of kindness to change the world, and share your own stories of hope in the comments below. Together, we can create a world where every act of compassion ripples outward to touch countless lives. Remember, change begins with a single brave heart. Will you be that heart? Join us on this journey of discovery, one story at a time.